everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be carving the arms and the legs, and we're going to carve it all in one piece. I've got two pieces that are approximately the same size of the styrofoam for both of the arms, and then I'll use a longer piece for the legs. And we do this all in one piece because you end up cutting it later in half where the elbow is, or yeah, for the elbow and also for the knees. So we're going to carve the whole arm. Now, the arm is so thin, there's not much shape to it, so we just got to get it down to the size that we can put the clay on it, and that's going to be pretty small. So I'm using this straight edge that came with that clay tool kit with the rollers. That ended up being pretty nice until it got dull, and it got dull after about one arm. So I'm really thinking now that that hot wire carver would be a really good idea. I'm going to go back and look at Amazon and think about getting that for maybe continuing this, because I think it would just make it a whole lot easier. And I mean, although this works pretty well right now, once it got dull, it just was leaving big chunks in the styrofoam, and it was going to be so much nicer if everything was smooth like it is now when I'm cutting. But basically all I'm doing right now is just going round and round, cutting off the edges to make it round, basically. And I just keep looking at it and looking at the size. It's going to end up being about the size of my little finger, or maybe even a little smaller, to make it so that to be the size of the sketch, it's going to be really tiny to put clay on top. Now I'm using this skewer that I bought to put down into this because I've realized it's going to be so small that probably once I get to a certain point, if I try cutting or sanding the styrofoam, it's just going to break and crumble into pieces. So if you put that skewer down into it, that'll hold it together. It was also something you can kind of hold on to at the top as you're carving. The only thing you have to really be careful about is that it's hard to put that skewer in so that it's in the middle all the way down. It usually tends to go off to one side, so you kind of have to be careful about where you're carving, that you carve into it at some point. And I did sort of almost get into it, so I don't know. Both of the arms, it was hard to do. The top up at the shoulder, you want to curve a little bit to make it rounded, because the shoulder will be rounded. The bottom, it can be straight across because that's the wrist, and that's where there'll be a ball joint to connect with the hand. But speeding this up, because really all you need to do is just keep carving. And you can use your X-Acto, you can use these straight edges, whatever you find. If you can get the hot wire that it's used for this, for carving styrofoam, I think that's going to work. And if I get one, I'll come back and just do a little special about that to show you how it works and what I think of it. I don't mind using these knives, but once they got dull, they were just pulling chunks of the styrofoam out. The X-Acto, the same thing. After I used it on one arm, it was pretty much dull. I was going to need to change the blade. So I did have two of these. I think this came with two knives, so I think I'll have enough to finish up the two arms and maybe even the legs. The biggest problem with this whole styrofoam thing is this has a lot of static electricity, and it really just gets everywhere. The bigger pieces you can kind of pick up, but it just sticks to your hand, it sticks to your clothes, and you really do kind of need a little handheld vac to keep cleaning up, because it really creates a huge mess, and then you carry it all over the house. The biggest thing to look for here is that you're kind of tapering down to the wrist, so it's thicker up at the top where the shoulder is. And then just keep measuring against your sketch, because it has to be smaller than the arm sketch, because you're going to put a layer of clay on top of it. So you can see it's already pretty small, but it's got to get really a lot smaller, especially down around the wrist. And that's the part where it can really start to just pull off chunks of the styrofoam. There's just not enough of the product there for it to carve. But something really sharp works well. X-Acto, maybe even some kind of a razor if you had like a razor knife. Just be careful because these things are really sharp. And I kept picking up this straight edge and one edge is sharp and one edge isn't. It's not always easy to tell. And if you start pressing down on it with your finger and it's sharp, you're going to cut yourself. So be very careful and just keep cleaning up as you go. That was really the most annoying part, especially how it sticks to your fingers and your hands and to the knives. But if you clean as you go, it's a whole lot better. So we're just going to continue carving, and I'm only going to carve one arm. We'll show you how to do it with one, and then you'll know how to do the other one. And the only thing then is just to match it. So I got it down to a certain point where it was hard to carve anymore, and then I started using the rasp file again. But again, that just really shreds it a little bit too much. And at this point, my X-Acto was pretty dull, and it was pulling off chunks. And so was the straight edge. You can see it's just not slicing through it as easily. So, the right tool for the right job probably is going to be that hot wire. But don't have one right now, so we're going to keep working with these straight edges or the X-Acto to see if we can get this down to where it needs to be. Basically, it's just going to be that skewer with a little tiny bit of styrofoam around it. I did have these little small files that I found that I used to use for working with metal. They're not ideal, but they seem to help a little bit when you got to this area where it was just, you really needed to just take off a little bit and maybe smooth it some. I think if I did this again, I would find better files. But anyway, there's the two arms. I did the second one off camera, although some chunks came out of that second one. So now we're going to work on the leg, and I'm going to start off with this big chunk, and I'll cut off a little bit of the bottom part based on the length of the leg, but we are going to carve this all in one piece. And then where you cut it, you're going to have the knee joint, and behind that is where you'll put the ball. But when the doll's standing up straight, it'll look like the knee is together because it'll just be a seam where you cut it. So once again, all we're doing is cutting off the excess. And you just start with the corners, cut them off, and then keep slicing. Hopefully this won't be quite as bad because it's not quite as thin. But again, I think it would have probably worked better with that hot wire knife. Now, the thing with the leg is, unlike the arm, just because it's so thin, there's not a whole lot of shape that you have to do to the styrofoam. You do have to spend a little more time shaping the leg because it's not just a straight round pole. Legs have a lot more curves, and you can see the calf if you look at the side view. The calf and even the angle of the leg, it's like a little bit angled back from the hip. So what I started doing was using my Sharpie to mark not just the back, but all the sides and where the knee is. And that really helped me eventually to be able to carve it a little bit easier, because when you're twisting it around and carving, it's really hard to keep track of where's the front, where's the back, and that's how it can really get out of shape. So I think that was a really good idea, and I would suggest that you try that as well, because you have to keep looking at it from the front and from the sides. Front, back, sides, all the time to get it to the right shape. I started out by just trying to make it some indentation of the back of the knee, and that's what I'm cutting here. And if you'll notice, you can cut from the top down to the middle and then from the bottom up to the middle. If you try to cut it all the way down, your angle of your knife will make it so that it cuts the wrong angle. So remember, when you're cutting these angles, you could cut up and down, especially when you're using a thicker blade like this. The width of the blade is going to get in your way. So mostly just trying to carve out that calf now to get the shape of that. Once I get that, then I think I can get a little bit more idea of how the front and the back is supposed to look. But the front has got to angle back from the knee a little bit. From the knee to the foot, it's going to angle a little bit in the front. And then the calf, of course, is going to angle from the knee. It's going to go out and then in to at the ankle. So basically all I can say here is you just got to keep looking at your pictures. And the other thing is I realized that I didn't have the side view exactly lined up with the front view. So I was marking where the knee is right here on the side view. And then when I looked at it on the front view, the knee was in another place. And it ended up being okay because I hadn't carved too much of it that it made a difference. But when you're doing the side view, you really want to make sure that it's lined up with the front. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to go back and forth. So I'm just marking like the general area of where the knee is here, the whole area, because I want to indent that on the sides and the back, and it'll protrude out a little bit in the front for the kneecap. And then I also wanted to mark down the center back and the center front, and this helps me keep it straight in terms of where the curves need to be. So I'm actually labeling it B for back, and same thing, F for front, and center line down the front. Otherwise, you just keep getting confused if you're twisting it around, and you'll end up making a mistake. And as I carved, if I had to carve away parts of the line, I just go back and put the lines back in to help be my guide. Also, as I was doing this, I decided I really do need to designate if this is the right leg or the left leg too, because the shape of a leg, especially around the thighs, is a little different up at the top. So I started out by putting it down on the left side of the doll, but as I shaped it, it ended up looking like it was more of the shape of the right leg. So then I ended up moving it over and I labeled it. But for right now, I'm just taking off more styrofoam as I shape it because it's still way too big. It's got to be small enough that you're going to be able to put about a 5 millimeter thickness of clay all the way around it. So when you're looking at your drawing, you're going to look at, is this piece of styrofoam in the center allowing for about 5 millimeters on either side, 4 to 5 millimeters, I think. Doesn't have to be exactly that, but that would be ideal because you have to have a thick enough clay that it's going to hold up, because we're going to eventually take the styrofoam out. The center of this doll has to be hollow to run the elastic through. That's the whole point of doing the styrofoam, is to make it hollow, and the styrofoam is fairly easy to remove after we let the clay dry. But if the clay is too thin, if you don't have a thick enough piece, as you're messing with it, it's just going to crumble and break, and then you've messed up all the work that you've done. So here was me figuring out that I actually had the knee in the wrong place, because I really think I need to go by this front view more than the side view. The side view is nice in terms of the shape and the angles of the side of the body, but I think if I make sure that all of my pieces fit within this front view, I have a better chance of everything fitting together. And that's really my concern at this point. I've realized this doll, if you don't have both legs pretty much the same size, both arms pretty much the same size, it's just not going to go together well. And I'm really dreading that because I think there's a really good chance that I'm going to mess it up. But knowing that that's the possibility, I think will help, because then at least you know what you're faced with. So still continuing to just keep cutting down. If I cut off edges that have the markings, I just put the markings back. But you can see it's starting to take shape like a leg with some curves. His legs are not straight. They definitely have a lot of curves. Now in the book, he actually goes into a lot of detail about the musculature under the skin to show you how to shape the leg. And I think, that's where we really get into the artistry of these dolls. They really are works of art. This doll for me will be, can I get it finished? Can I actually do it and accomplish making the pieces? And can I get it fairly even so that they fit together well? If I can get to that part, then if I make other dolls in the future, then I could focus more on the artistry. If you didn't see my previous videos, first of all, the book I'm using is the book by Ryo Yoshida of Japanese ball jointed doll style that he uses, which you can buy on Amazon. And then I also had the English translation, but the links to both of those, the book and the English translation site on the web, are in the very first video in the series in the description box. So you can go back and find those links if you'd like to follow along and maybe make your own doll. And I think that would be super cool if you did. I'd love to see them. I'm going to just keep working on this to get it down to the right size, keep replacing my lines as I sand them off or carve them off. And now I've started looking at this as more of the right leg. So it just seems like the carving, especially the outer thigh, seems to look more like it would fit on the right side. So I will be designating right and left on the leg. I'm not for the arms, because basically that's just a straight piece of styrofoam, and I'll end up using the clay carving as more of the shape for the arms than I am for the legs. The legs hopefully be shaped enough that I can just put the layer of clay over it and it will be pretty much shaped, other than a little bit of fine tuning around the kneecap, because you want to give that a little bit more definition. Now here I just ended up using a fingernail file for acrylic fingernails, because that rasp was just pulling off too much of the styrofoam and making a big mess. So, use the tools you have. I think I'm going to try to find a better set of files that are a little bit smaller grit, and I'm going to probably buy that hot wire to cut the styrofoam, and I'll talk to you more about that in another video when I get them, because they'll come from Amazon. It'll take a couple days to get here. But the leg's pretty much done at this point, and I'm going to label it as the right leg of the doll. You might say, oh no, that's the left. That's the left looking at straight on, but it is the doll's right leg. So RL for right leg. That's finished. Off camera, I'll be making her left leg. Hopefully it will match. But that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned some things. Hope you were entertained. And come back. We'll be hopefully working on the next video very shortly in the next day or so. Alright, thanks for watching, and be sure and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss anything. Thanks, and bye.